All right. So my conversation today is really about who Fenestration Canada has become as part of kind of the regulatory sphere. That over the last 2 years is kind of a weird ride. I get kind of it's working. All right. So yeah, before I kind of just jump right in, come on, technology, man. When we were talking about AI yesterday, this is exactly what I kept thinking about was like, we're just not quite ready because I can't even click over. So first I'm going to just do a quick regulatory overview of kind of the maturity of where we are. And then we're going to talk about tariffs. And so I'll give an update on that, what that looked like, kind of the structure of it. It was a weird topic in the background. There's a lot to unpack about that. And then next, I'm going to talk about my current obsession and what I consider is kind of the most important piece to solve in our Canadian industry, in my opinion. And Glenn's going to come join me from Canadian Premium Sands and give a bit of context to it. And then I'll kind of unpack what is going on and then leave it up to us as an industry to decide what's next. So Fenestration Canada hired me back in September of 2023. And the intent with my role as codes and regulatory director was that I was mostly going to be sitting on code boards and playing in standards. And it's like, we even created like this map of what my role was going to look like. And 3 years, we did. Yeah. Like really genuinely, I've done this exercise everywhere that I've ever worked is that I kind of structure what that future looks like. And I've never had it differ so far from the original intent. But here we are. And, the reason for that is kind of this threefold problem. And so the first one is one that's kind of old for us is lack of self-sufficiency. Canada has always been kind of behind the eight ball industrially on making pretty much everything. Like we've always kind of had this hard time getting to it because we have a big country and we have had a small population. So that lack of self sufficiency is still bright and present. Like we still deal with it on market forces. Pressure from imports. Yeah, I've been hearing about this before I joined the association. Like it's been like well, we're seeing more imports. It's hurting us. Margins suck. What are we going to do about it? Fair market. It's like, this is obviously something that is just not going away. And it's getting harder. Like there are, some of this market dynamic shifts with the pricing of things and how other countries have kind of navigated into it, and the increase of dealers and increase of regulations. We've created this environment for ourselves where the import pressures are becoming untenable. Like we're seeing the shrinking of our manufacturing base, and that's not a small conversation. We have this beautiful ecosystem in Canada of roughly 650 window and door manufacturers, assemblers. That's wonderful. Because what that means is that we have a whole bunch of fish in the sea, and they all kind of feed off each other and they breed the environment. It sucks when you get down to like 5 or 6 players, because then it's a whole bunch of sharks, and you got nothing to do but eat other sharks. And we don't want that. Like we could still maintain our ecosystem, but there's a little bit of play here that we're going to have to fight. And then last, most recent, some of these pressures from the South. And any of my U.S. friends here, I get it. Like not the U.S.'s like population problem, but it also is, and it has sucked in Canada. This is brutal. Like we had a trade relationship that was well established, well harmonized, and frankly, maybe not for our benefit. Like that's kind of one of the lessons learned here is we're stepping back and we're looking at it and going, is this still what we want? Like we're looking at it from the standards point of view, we're looking at it from our trade point of view, we're looking at it from kind of a holistic problem. But so my point of this slide is that we've had many of these problems really back further than the last 2 years, but it's obvious that the last 2 years have put some pressure on us. So we've changed. Fenestration Canada had to adapt in order to deal with this market. So, of course, the role that I had kind of turned into this coordination advocacy role where we had to build some relationships and figure out what to do next. So we were education focused. We sat in standards boards. We educated you on specific code items, and we were, spiraling around specific topics. And that's still important, but it's not the whole picture. And it didn't pull things together the way that we're kind of turning into, which is, we've got these relationships across the province so that we have a collective voice for government. With federal government, we have this collective voice. At things like having a memorandum with AVFQ provides us the ability to say, we actually speak for the country, because admittedly, before this moment, I wouldn't say we did. Quebec was a gap. So thank you. That means a lot. And so as we continue to cooperate together across the country, this voice becomes unified, and the things we can do is really cool. I can't express enough how interesting it has been to kind of walk through and be able to say, as an industry, this is where we stand. And it's powerful. Like, one of the things that's kind of hard to conceptualize is, as an industry, we represent, our association represents roughly 50% of the entire fenestration industry in Canada. That is cool. You know how hard it is to represent 50% of 650 manufacturers? It's tough. So, one of the big things in this role, as we've been kind of going along, is I've been doing a lot of raw reach outs to different manufacturers to understand what your stance is. That I needed your voice. I can't unilaterally make the decision, and I don't, frankly. Like, even if I were to make a decision, it's got to go through the board for approval. That's the point of having a board at an association level, is that we have a collective voice that actually approves things like this. But that being said, the board doesn't also represent the entirety of our industry. I also need that collective voice back. So I worked really hard at the beginning of last year when the counter tariffs and those pieces started showing up. What do you guys need? How do we fix this? How are we going to, build our vision of our future? So one of the big things we needed to do was create a bit of a framework. So we created the advocacy committee essentially as that framework, so that you guys have a place to put your voice, so that we as a collective can be pushing into this without me having to make cold calls, all day long, which was fun. I actually enjoyed that. That was interesting. So one of the first things for me, whenever we're talking about a collective, value system, collective direction, is to have a guiding document. So that's the first thing we did at the advocacy committee, is we created a policy agenda document. So this QR code will take you to a PDF online so you guys can see it in full. I'm not going to go through it in full. What I'm going to do is kind of explain the structure of that framework. So it is based off of 4 themes supported by 4 pillars. So the 4 themes, or the 4 pillars, are protecting against unfair trade. Of all the things that I hear from manufacturers, there is no one that is stronger than, I want a fair market to play in. Give me something that I can compete in, and I can compete in such a way that if I do something better for my customers, it is worthwhile. Otherwise, why am I doing it? The game has to not be rigged. So that's the first pillar. Next is reducing non-value requirements. Yeah, Jomo yesterday was talking about conformance versus performance, and obviously you guys have heard me kind of go through the spiel on where NAFS is and where our standards are and how the code relates to it. There is some stuff there that isn't working, and it's costing us money, and it's not making benefit for manufacturers or customers. Those are pieces we got to work on. That needs to, the non-value add to our system needs to be adjusted in such a way that it actually adds value. Next is strengthening our supply chains. As I talked about my obsession, I'm going to get into a little bit of float glass, which is kind of our first real stab at this subject. I can see a whole bunch of maturity points growing from this, but that's our first real go at it. And last is improving manufacturing. Now, I'll admit, I don't think we've got something right now that really pushes that outside of maybe the life cycle inventory project. That's kind of our step towards, how do we as a market take control over the information and the shape of what those next steps in our market look like, so that we're not just being dictated to by government. I'm not okay with that. I don't think you guys are okay with that. We don't trust it yet. I hope in time we do. I hope we build the kind of relationships where we can look at government through that lens and we can say, we know that you're doing the right thing. Maybe you just need some nuance, instead of, I just don't trust anything you touch. So I'd love to get to that point. So one of the first things after that advocacy policy document was to start outlining priorities. What is our next real steps? So building official education is one of the big ones. It's we really would like the building officials to understand what they're looking at, because they don't. If they see a label, Good enough. Check. Move on. Or even better, like on the East Coast, do they have Energy Star ratings? Good. Check. Move on. It's like that really misses some key and fairly low level elements that, with a little bit of education, our building a code officials could actually regulate us better. So that's some of what Terry and I are doing. And we've got an education meeting coming up that we're going to be looking at, call it provincially focused, non-compliant kind of type of education, or not non-compliant, but what is the standards? What is the expectation on the market from our products? Um, NBC engagement and regulatory participation, continuing to work at the code level and making sure that that's shaped in a way that works for us. That's another one of those key pieces, and that's great because Terry and I do that. It sucks right now. We need to work on the structure of the National Building Code. It's just, and I'll kind of talk about it later in our 9.888 meeting on guard. But there's some work to do for us to provide input into the structure of the NBC, not just providing input in our little sector of it. And then trade remedies and compliance. I'm getting into tariffs. You guys have heard a lot from me on that side in the background. I am overly well versed in this topic at this point. I really did not expect to become, somebody well versed on tariffs. That was not like my goal when I moved here. But here we are. So, of the supplemental goals, flow class was the next one. So I should specify. There was a survey that went out to the advocacy committee that defined which of these initiatives were critical. And so there's a lot of data behind that now, and I love data. It makes me happy. So there is some interesting information about kind of the difference of opinion on how strong some of these were, but those top three were absolutely critical. Like, we as an association believe that is what we need to be going after. Float glass was next. Defining the durability of our products was next. This federal label framework conversation that's been going on in the background is another one that's interesting. Standard simplification would be very helpful. Unpacking some of the data behind HOT 2000 if we continue to have to use that piece of software. And digital permitting. So these were kind of the spread of topics that were priorities from the advocacy committee. So anybody that's interested, I would strongly recommend reaching out and letting me know that you want to participate in it, or I will continue to find ways to make sure that that information on what this looks like goes back out to you so you understand what those priorities are. So we'll continue to work on that. All right, on to tariffs. So at the beginning of this year, I before I get into the steel derivatives tariffs, which was kind of like our first I don't want to call it practical change to something that was bigger than ourselves, but it was pretty monumental in my view. But last year the whole tariff item started with the U.S. and then we had counter tariffs from Canada. And then one of the big pieces was float glass showed up on that item, and we all collectively said, that's insane, don't touch that. And so, Fenestration Canada, we hired a lobbyist team called Maple Leaf Strategies, and we went out and we talked to federal government, and one of the first and most important things we said is, don't touch this. It will break us. It will break your housing market. Just don't touch it. So, they actually heard us. I got to have a good conversation with the Deputy Minister of Housing, and he had gotten that feedback from our lobbyist team and myself, and he went off and made sure that the finance team removed that particular section before it showed back up. And luckily, we never got those counter tariffs. That 25% just kind of went away, and all the stress that was involved in it kind of went away. Kind of. And then we got to December 26th of 2025, and the Canadian government, in response to some of the steel tariff stuff that was going on down in the States, put in their own steel derivative surtax. So I hear about this right at the beginning of the year, and my first response, because we've already built some of these relationships with the federal side, is let's go talk to the people that implemented this. And so we went and talked to the Department of Finance. I talked to their senior economic advisor. He walked us through why they did some of this and what the process was for removing it if it didn't make sense. So there were two HS codes, or harmonized codes, that were related to this. First was 392520. So that was plastic, builder grade plastic. So that's UPVC windows and fiberglass windows and doors. And slabs for whatever reason. HS codes are messy. Anybody that wants to know more about that, I'm not going to spend any more time. You can talk to me after. But so this one and 8302 4190, and so that was window and door hardware. Those two, I kept hearing from you guys saying, this is a problem. Like, we don't have enough supply, or we have absolutely no supply of hardware. Like, we make 2% of our own hardware in Canada. Um, and so we wound up sending this off to the board, and they approved that we were going to start moving through a remission process for this based off of the process we got from the Department of Finance. And we took it back to the advocacy committee because there was some push and pull on, do we protect, do we try to leave 3925 out of it because there are some manufacturers that benefit from that tariff, some that don't. It sucked. Like, I will admit, I kind of talked about it in our manufacturers meeting, but it's really hard when there is a section of our membership that really wants something and the majority really doesn't want something. As an association, I can't act bilaterally without your support. So, I'll view 3925 as a policy hygiene exercise, frankly, that the idea that plastic windows were on a steel derivative surtax list is stupid. Like, that's just wrong. We know that's wrong. The intent there was they were trying to catch the reinforcing that was going into UPVC products. That was the whole point. And that very clearly we could tell them is not really happening. Like, we do have some UPVC products that come in with steel reinforcement, but that is far below the average. Like, there is rare exceptions where that's the case. And certainly on fiberglass doors, that's just not the case. That's not what's happening. So we went through the remission process. And just a little bit of insight on what that actually means is you send the remission in, and then there is a discovery team that goes through the process of unpacking your rationale. And then that goes to the implementation team if they deem it appropriate to remit. And they write up their remission order that has to go to the Champagne Minister of Finance. And he signs off on it, and it's done. If you do the process in reverse, that's kind of how tariffs get put into place. There is no public review of this. Like, in Canada, we don't have a process right now of checking this when it happens. There's a deeper question for me now that I see the process, whether or not we as an association have a responsibility to use our voice to ask the question, do we need a public review for this? Because in the past, I don't think tariffs really needed that. But I'll admit, I go back and forth on myself about this topic. It's the question mark of how far down the rabbit hole do we want to step? Because that one starts to get into policy. So, always interested in feedback. So that happens, and we go through the process, and they sign off on a remission order for RHS codes because AVFQ and Fenestration Canada and CHBA and a few other associations, we all collectively pooled our voice, and we got MPs involved, and it was a whole thing in the background. But we managed to get a hold of Minister LeBlanc, and he and a few others at that high level of federal government got Minister Champagne to see that it was a problem. And within 2 weeks of our remission submission, they had completed their paperwork to get this removed. That was our voice. You guys rock. Like, I just cannot say it enough. That is powerful. I think it's hard to understand what it's like to get a minister to literally do anything. So, good job. This is you. So, long and short, the remission process moving forward, there isn't a removal of the remission. The way that it works is you get an OIC code that you apply to your CARM portal, and that removes the responsibility for paying the surtax. There is a correction order. So if you haven't paid the surtax yet, then you can correct the requirement for it. And then last is refunds. Refunds have happened. I've now gotten to hear from manufacturers that have gone through the refund process. It took about 2 months for the hardware process to go through. So that's a success. This process works. And it took an enormous amount of work in the background trying to get these bloody brokers to understand it. Like, it was written in a way that sucked. I like, frankly, it was almost like the government didn't do us a favor by writing it so poorly. But what can we do? We still got the process the way we needed it. It solves the problem in the background. But if anybody's still getting this surtax, you need to talk to your brokers and make sure they're going through the process. Like, it's not something that is automatic. So Section 232 tariffs. Our friend from the US that presented yesterday, Michael Pierce, he talked about a handful of topics, and this is something he and I have gone back and forth quite a bit on. The 232 tariffs in the US suck. Like, they're bad. There is no way around it. Like I had learned a whole bunch of ways to kind of like sidestep the US tariffs and to do duty drawback and like play with the system. It doesn't exist anymore. They broke it. Like there isn't somebody in the CBP even to talk to about this anymore. They stripped their administration down to essentially no one to talk to. It's scary on this side. So even worse for the guys that are shipping aluminum and steel products down to the States, this is going to get worse. Like their intent is to continue to ratchet the pain of this thing up. So we're at 50% now on aluminum and steel windows and doors. Like and I wish I had a better answer for you. And like Michael and I talk a lot about this one, and we're putting pressure where we can. But this is one that I'm expecting is going to get worse before it gets better, and there's no way around it. Like the only there's kind of two pathways that you can kind of play with. So you can either have like 90, I think it's 95% smelted in the U.S. and then it's exempt if you bring it back. You can also do a collapse method as long as you don't provide all the parts for what you're providing. So, like if you were to collapse your product and it has to be built on site, and you forget the screws, for instance, they have to buy the screws in the States. That's a method for you to essentially avoid, call it the collective value of this, because similar to our steel derivative surtax in Canada, they've removed the concept of derivatives. Like I'm pissed off with the way that all of this is being marketed because frankly the derivative conversations become nonsense. Derivative used to be if I have a portion of my product that is meeting the tariff intent, that's what's getting exempt, but that has been destroyed. Like these are full product value items. It's all called ad valorem or full price. Anyway, so yeah, yeah. All right, so that is what we reacted to. I'll call this playing defense. Like we as a market figured out how to play defense. Like you guys rock. So this is us playing offense. So let me start by introducing Glenn Leroux. We started talking, I guess, a little over a year ago now. And so the tariffs started happening last year, and float glass has been on our bucket list for a while as an industry. We'd kind of like to see it back. But yeah, Glenn, I'm just gonna let you do your introduction, and then I'll kind of roll into the next.
Okay. So, as mentioned, I'm Glenn LaRue. I'm probably the guy you were sitting on a bar stool beside at some point last night because I sat in a lot of bar. Well, I didn't even get a damn bar stool until the last pub. So I was blocking the view of the hockey game for most of the night for people. But yeah, so I'm the president and CEO of a company called Canadian Premium Sand. What we have, the core of the company is we have a very large deposit of very high grade silica sand, 160 kilometers north of Winnipeg. And that sand is of exquisite quality to make glass. The original plan we had was to actually make ultra clear glass for the solar panel industry. All of our customers are in the US. A couple of US policies, an election later, and that whole thing got destroyed. So we sat back and said, well, what can we do now? And we'd looked at float glass early on, back sort of in the COVID era, and it just wasn't as attractive. There was this hockey stick market for solar glass in the U.S. growing, and it did that. It grew because 100% of the glass used in solar panels manufactured in North America is imported. 100%. So pretty tantalizing market for a company with a rare deposit of sand. So roll the clock forward, and we looked at the Canadian market and realized it's similar in that 100% of the glass, float glass used in Canada is imported. Of course, you guys are in the business, you know that. But let's just think about that for a second. How the hell did we get here? We have, not just us, there's sand elsewhere, but we have high-grade silica sand. We have responsibly produced natural gas, and a lot of it. I'm a petroleum engineer. That's, my whole career was spent in that business up until now. We have hydroelectricity, we got electricity, we have labor, we have skills, and we buy the stuff from everybody else.
And it's a great transition to history, and then I'll give you the full gambit for your slides.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenn. So, yeah, history. How did we get here? So, for Canada, dependent on the US for glass really since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Like we've had a heck of a time making glass because managing temperatures and managing scale has never really been our strong suit. It's cold. Glass kind of needs hot. It's been challenging. I mean, we live in a world now where our envelopes are really maintain the technology is pretty impressive as far as being able to maintain this weird geological volcano that is a float glass plant. But we were doing rolled and plate glass up until the Pilkington process in 1959. And so the Pilkington brothers create this new process and where you've got tin floated silica, and we wind up with our glass plant, the way we think about it. And then back in 1969 and 1971, they built the only two float glass factories we've had in Canada. So one in Ontario and one in Quebec. So, the last float glass factory that we had was in Owen Sound. So that shut down in 2008, which is 16 years ago. So we haven't had our own float glass production in that many years. And I use 16 years because I can't tell you how many times I said 30 and I heard other people say 30 or 25. And it's like, we need to be specific about this. It's been 16 years, which is not insignificant. And again, the float glass plants were built back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Yeah. Anyway, talk more about that. So the last time we had a real attempt on float glass was a company called Gigny, which is and I'm actually not enunciating it correctly. I always kind of botch that. But they tried a float glass plant in Guelph and in Stratford or Stratford, and ultimately it was that they were ready. Like finances were there, they were committed, they had the experience, they were the proponent, they were kicking down the door making this happen, and the city council was working through it, but they had environmentalists that were really bothered by the whole process, and they were specifically concerned about like aquifers and how the water was being used, and as far as I can tell, like there was actually the environmental leader of that group I got to sit down and have an interview with so I could understand what went wrong here. Like, what were you guys struggling with? Because we need this. Like, if you were going to stop it, how do I make sure that we address whatever problems you guys had here? So, aquifers were a big one. And then just overall, the promises they were saying weren't going to be fulfilled. I honestly don't think they went under the hood long enough. They reacted. But ultimately, the project was abandoned. That's a real sadness in my view, though. Kind of brings us to where we are. We are the only G20 country in the world that doesn't make our own float glass. That's unacceptable. Like we have the resources for it. There's no point in that. So this is where I'm going to give it back to you, and you can explain the benefits.
Right. Yeah, I did the same thing to Adrian in Winnipeg. I upstaged the slides, got ahead of myself. So I'll behave myself now, but I'll slide over here so I can see the darn things. So yeah, we're not making any of this in Canada. It's inexcusable for a country with the resources we have. And here's another interesting tidbit. So we looked I'm going to go back and forth between the solar and the float here because we're fully permitted. We have full permits to extract the sand, transport it to Selkirk, where we have a plot of land, 121 acres, serviced by rail, natural gas. This is a dream for making glass. But U.S. policy made us look at doing it in the U.S. Actually, we looked at the U.S. right out of the gate for some reasons for solar glass. But what we found repeatedly in every jurisdiction we looked was the input costs were 20% lower in Selkirk, Manitoba than anywhere else we could find. And I'd venture to say, we didn't look in Ontario or Quebec, but I'll venture to say that'll stand if we looked at building this in Ontario or Quebec. And the reason is the sand's there, the natural gas is there, hydro's there, and it's really cheap. It's cheap in Quebec too, but it's really cheap in Manitoba, and it's 97% renewable. So we went full bore. We did the designs. As I mentioned, all the permits are in place. Our friends at Patero contributed to that, to the design. The PCL construction is the building that keeps the rain off, the important part, I guess, is the way we look at it. But but it's a $700 million project. And that's a big ticket item. But it can be done. I believe it can be done, or I wouldn't be wasting my time standing here. But it's big. So we have provincial support. We have agreements with the First Nations in place and have had for some time. This there isn't a box in the current scenario of Canada. There isn't a box that this project doesn't tick. It's all on the yes side, and there isn't a single no side box as to why we shouldn't do this, except $700 million. But it's
An operator.
well, and we need an operator. I mean, we're not naive here. We're a little publicly traded company. We're not afraid of doing this ourselves. That's how we were going to do the solar glass ourselves. But it would just be so much easier if we could encourage an international glass company to come into this project in either a technical capacity or, quite frankly, take the whole thing. And we'll give it to them. Not give it to them, but and we're out. Yeah, well, I tell you,
I'll do it.
what we bring to the party, quite frankly,
Sorry now.
what we bring to the party, quite frankly, is a minimum of 2 years. If any other glass company wants to come and start a float plant in Canada in this market that's dying for it's dying for a float glass plant, to say the least, but they're at least 2 years. This is not easy to find a place with the sand, get the environmental licenses in place and all the other agreements. And in this world, you have to deal with everything. So that's where we sit. We're planning to build a 600-ton-a-day float. We're ready to go. But what we need is support. Because I can tell you from hands-on experience, this is not going to fly without offtake agreements. So we need the industry to step up and
Take it from there.
take it from there. It's everything's aligned. The government, I've had a meeting with Champagne, I've had meetings with the Premier of Manitoba, and enough political meetings to, quite frankly, get a really strong impression of how that system works. But where are we at with the slides here?
Well, wait, I can take it.
Yeah, I think we're short of time, but anybody that wants any more information on this, please feel free. I stand out in the crowd, not hard to find. So, all right, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, so just to piggyback a little bit on the government support side, I'll kind of get to it at the last portion of this float glass slide, but trying to coordinate float glass manufacturer interest, potential investment interest, government interest, and your guys' interest in this project is a lot of the work that I'm doing in the background for this. That's kind of what it looks like. Trying to pull all these players together and make sure that we de-risk this opportunity for all the players involved. So that's happening. Like you said, the Hollow Nations has been on board, Selkirk and the government of Manitoba. We have bi-weekly conversations with at this point. Like, they are wildly on board. Federal government has shown signaling that they are interested, but a lot of it, my next steps with them is to create a working group with finance and ISED and housing to make sure they understand what's going on here. Because, one of the things that I'm big on is, federal government, if they don't want to participate meaningfully, I think it's a real loss and kind of stupid on their part that this is a major project. Like, in every definition of that word, they're advertising exactly what we're talking about here. And so my big goal with them is they need to understand what the opportunity is, and if they're going to fund it, that Canadian strings are attached. We don't make float glass. We are going to get an international interest. We need to make sure that whatever money is attached there connects back to our needs here. That's where I think they're valuable. So the expression of interest project has been awesome. Thank you so much to the people that have already participated. There's a lot of information I'm learning about kind of the shape of the market you guys want to see in glass, what kind of the pricing model around it looks like, and just general overall interest has been great. So for those that don't know what the expression of interest is, and I know I'm running out of time quickly here, it's a non-binding exercise so that we can get a feel for how much glass the industry is willing to commit to buying if we did this. And it's awesome. Like I've got my slides here, but we're at 274 tons per day on a median amount of tons committed to. We are over the 50% mark on the amount that we need in order to make this work. We're looking at between 115 to 176 million dollars of commitments already into buying this annually. So when we did the expression of interest, it's on a range. It's between 0 and 25% of your buying interest, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and 75 to 100. And so this kind of gives you a range because it's unreasonable to expect that you guys are going to buy 100% of your glass from one supplier. That's stupid. I don't recommend it. Matter of fact, like we need to diversify, but it's helpful for us to get a range for how much glass you're willing to buy so that we can honestly deal with this information. So one thing our industry will know, and I've been keeping a close eye on, is how much of this glass is overlapping at this point. So meaning like, do you have somebody that's buying the float glass and then making IGUs, and then a manufacturer that's buying IGUs? Are we doubling up? And I can confidently say that all the expression of interest so far does not have overlap. So this is pretty clean data right now. I'm expecting that to change as we get closer to the 100% marker. I think that's inevitable. We are going to hit that point where it overlaps, and there's going to be some data when we get to that last 10% that's going to be tough. But it's a wide range. I'm getting it from all over the country. You can kind of see this regional demand distribution that, Ontario, what was surprising is how much the Prairies is buying versus how much Manitoba and Ontario are buying. Ontario and Quebec are buying. And, West Coast, I'm surprised knowing that market well. That was a small amount of glass that was bought. Now, there being said, there's a couple big players there that still haven't participated. But this is kind of a dashboard of what I'm playing with as far as the numbers that are coming out from this project so far. But this is you guys. And I can't express how helpful this is when I'm getting to these float glass conversations and trying to get the plants interested to have the conversation. So from industry's point of view, what we're doing next is we're essentially coordinating these meetings with, the various big float glass companies. We've gotten a handful of CEOs that are actually interested to sit down and have conversations. If you know what that's like, it is quite a thing to influence them to have those conversations. So, again, I can't say thank you enough for participating. It's meaningful. Like, this is a big project. We have the chance to fix one of our fundamental issues in the industry, and it's being done with your voice. It goes back to the whole point of this regulatory framework, is that it's like, how do we as Fen Canada use our voice for the industry? And you guys are doing this. That's what we can do with our voice. So it's going to require us to align. It's going to require government to align. Project financing is a big one. Like, obviously, $700 million isn't a small figure. Let me do questions at the end if I have a minute. And then a proven operator. So, this is the QR code for the EOI. If anybody is interested to participate in it that hasn't already, feel free to reach out to me if you need anything. I'm going to quickly run through the what's next portion of this because I have, obviously, this isn't the end of our advocacy as an association. We're not done. So there is code stuff that is in the background. We're going to talk about 98888 here in a minute. There's been some CUSMA renegotiation. Like, we have a document here. The QR code will take you to what our feedback on the negotiation was. There's been some work in the background on the Buy Canadian policy because small business is getting screwed on this side. We need to work on that. So CFIB and ourselves are having some conversations on that front. The federal label program, there's serious conversations about what the future of Energy Star and the federal label program is, and we could be shaping that. That's kind of, the advocacy portion of my job. The life cycle inventory work is moving, and that's going to let us shape kind of a future aspect of our industry. Durability is a conversation that we're having a conversation with NRC about, as, how do we establish benchmarks for how long our products last? Like, what are failure states, and what could we actually prove to customers outside of just our warranty? Label confidence program is something Terry and I have talked quite a bit about, is the idea of creating a confidence program with the labels itself, where there's a check that, ideally a QR code the inspectors could scan and say good or bad. We got to make it really simple for them. But I just ask anybody that's interested to get involved at this level with the advocacy side. We have an advocacy committee. Come talk to me. I'd love to get your feedback. And then we have our future NAFS task group, which, the non-value added and improving manufacturing, that kind of feeds into that. So those are kind of the two places where advocacy is happening in my world, side of just the constant communication with you guys and governments. But yeah, I'll take the last couple questions before we get into lunch.
Yeah, we want to break for lunch here as soon as we can. We don't want to hold you guys from your lunch, but as you can see, Adrian has put a huge amount of work into the glass item, and that's all in support of our industry and our membership. So please get involved on that side. We need all the help we can. I do have a question. 16 years ago, that float plant closed. Why?
Hey, do you want to? Sweet.
So as you can probably appreciate, we've hired a lot of consultants, and a lot of them were U.S. based. They were U.S. based. One of the guys ran that plant, and that was closed because, well, they had to close. They needed to close something. That was the most efficient plant in the fleet, and they closed that because there was far less blowback closing a Canadian plant than one in the U.S.
Yeah. All right. Any questions from you guys on this stuff? Marco.
All hands.
Thanks for the presentation. Just really quickly, on the two main metrics, the 2-year timeline and the $700 million, that includes concurrently, is the extraction process, the mining portion of it complete? And is the float going to be happening simultaneously? Or when you say 2 years and 700 million, is that for both or is that for one?
It's the 700 million is for the float plant. The sand extraction is 90 million. But I firmly believe bringing in a partner like a big glass company, that'll easily be done, both of them for 700 million. So, and we're pursuing independently, the sand extraction anyway. So.
Yeah, I'll just speak briefly to Manitoba. Government of Manitoba has also offered to do some support on the infrastructure. Like that's where they've actually played I think an important role in the future.
Any other questions? Yeah.
It's not so much a question, but rather a comment. And thank you very much for these efforts, because I think it's very good for not only the industry in Canada, but could also be good for the whole of North America. Because as it stands, not only do we not have any float factories in Canada, but we have seen a significant reduction in the number of float facilities in the whole of North America. So at the moment, we don't feel it so much because the economy is not at full blast. But if it does become at full blast, we've seen instances where we were on allocation and that could very well come back.
Very personally feel that one. I remember having multifamily buildings where I had frames going in, and it took me months to get the glass in because we had allocations, and that was unacceptable.
Anybody else?
Jomo. Sorry, guys. I know we're keeping from lunch.
So yeah, $700 million is a lot to ask a single company to invest, and particularly in a country that has a bad reputation for spending a lot of money on a project and then having that project canceled for environmental concern reasons. So if you're unable to find a single buyer or investor, are there any other potential investment routes, like a consortium of Canadian companies that have a strong interest in glass, like maybe window manufacturers, that type of thing?
You have a checkbook with you?
I got a quick.
signing authority. I'm sorry.
The quick answer. The quick answer is all contributions to the cause are welcome. So I think there's some elegance in a portion or potentially even all of the funding coming from the user group or the buyer group. We were looking at a model like that for the solar glass, and we had the largest U.S. solar panel manufacturer right at the doorstep for that. It's because it just makes sense. So, and also if, you know, a model that one could consider here is if we could get the funding together with the industry, it's pretty attractive for a Saint-Gobain or a Syzygiam or one of these others to come in at that point on a technical contract. So
I'll just quickly say that you know, and this isn't something that I'm obviously looking for, but in banking and private equity interest are showing up as the conversation gets louder, and so the investment's not going to come from one source, in my view. Like maybe, probably not though. Like that's going to be a collective, and even like the float glass plants that are around the world right now, a lot of them are joint efforts. Like there are multiple glass plant factories or manufacturers that are getting together and co-funding that.
Maybe I did not understand, but the operator would be you would be manufacturing clear glass, and then the operator would be responsible, let's say, to have a coater install in on site, or
it's likely that the float plant, by the data coming in, it has to have coating and would very likely have tempering.
but the operator would be responsible for the coating that would be applied.
That's right. Yeah. And, you know, one of the conversations we had with the float glass plant was that they were already willing to license their low E coating and act as a technical operator on it. Like we have one that is willing to come in and support an operator rather, like to help build it out and get it to a point where it's rolling. But
And that coder is factoring that 720 million. There's a coder
Yeah.
included. Thank you.
correct. Yeah. The low E coating we knew kind of right from the get-go had to be there.
If you're really hungry, I apologize, but this is a hot topic.
Yeah.
So, federal policy over, 20 years has really it's made Canada untenable, or we've abdicated our responsibility of manufacturing our own raw materials. And like I know provincial is bought in, but just how do we see climate driven policies from a federal could have an impact on that? That's
Happy to.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel very much so that the federal government has shown expressed interest in this. I think they see it. Like I had a roundtable in Ottawa last year where this was on the docket. It's like we need you to start considering de-risking a float glass plant, and the answer was of course when we have an operator.
I just want to get something very directly here. If we had the money, we can start. There is nothing stopping us. We have all the environmental permits in place. We've done all the public consultations. As I mentioned, we have agreements with the First Nations. If I had $700 million show up tonight, I could start moving yellow iron tomorrow. So there's nothing in the way, just money and support from the industry to justify that investment.
And to that point, Adrian, I want to lean into the expression of interest thing. I've said we should have one of those giant thermometers from the charity thing on the website or something. We need people to weigh in on this. And as you said, there's still some big operators out there that have not. What can we do collectively to make sure that input comes in? Because you know what, this is not a big deal. I mean, they're filling out a form, for God's sake. I realize they might have to dig into the records a little bit, but I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So what can we do collectively to get that to happen? How confident are you that we're going to get to the 100% of what we're looking for? And at what point are we cutting off this consultation process? What's our deadline? And then reporting results and saying, okay, we got there or we didn't.
Yeah. Okay. So first question. I can't express enough how appreciative I am that the industry trusts me with this. Like, no question, I'm asking for private data.
I'm still mad at people. Everybody should have done this by now.
I get it. Yeah, but But you have to see it from their point of view. It's like they're giving data to the association in order to try to manage this process. For confidence sake, this sheet that the information's going into is on a private server. Like, I'm very intentionally having to be thoughtful on how this is being managed because I respect that this is a huge push of trust. So, not everybody knows me, believe it or not. Like, the absolute best thing I can get from you guys is I've been reaching out individually to the ones that I know well. That it's like, I worked with you. I understand you. It's like, help me just push this bar. So I do that. If I get that same support from you guys, means a lot. That you're essentially saying, look, I have my trust relationship with you. I trust him. Do the thing. That's the absolute best thing.
Please vouch for Adrian with all your friends.
No,
vouch
please
for
vouch
Fenestration Canada.
Canada. Yeah, it's so that's the first answer to that. And then what was the third answer? Third question?
When do we say okay?
Oh, enough. When we get to 600 tons. Like 100% is 420 right now. That's our goal. 70% of this plant. In my view, if we get to 70% of our expression of interest into this, I don't know how much more a float glass manufacturer really needs in order to feel confident. Like, if we get to 600, this is absurd. Like, if we are at 600 and we don't already have the operator and funding, something's not right. Like, the process isn't working, or there's something fundamental about our market that we're missing. But I don't think so. I think the equation makes sense. I think if we start getting into the spreadsheet, we're looking at 5 to 8 years on a return on investment. That's really has to do with, is there enough fish there?
Well, it's got to do with the pricing also.
Yeah. So if we get to the 600 tons of capacity for Canadian users and it doesn't go through, then there's the bigger problem is there a tax disadvantage, corporate tax disadvantage? Does the global businesses, multinational businesses, see that it's not a good and safe place to invest in Canada? And if you get to those numbers and we can't, we as FenCan or the federal, provincial, yourself can't get to an agreement, then the bigger question is, not only is it sustainable for a window or for a float glass plant, but what does that mean for our industry, like for manufacturing period in Canada? So this is really a tell of like, what the future of investment in manufacturing is in Canada compared to North America or the rest of the world. And I think the tell will be if we get that capacity where it's financially viable, even at 420, and there's still no investment with, I know some of the funding that you have in place, man, we've just run into a brick wall. And truthfully, so I don't know what the answer is. It's a lot bigger than all the people in this room. But that's part of like, there's now a fundamental issue of investing dollars to try to make money in Canada. That becomes a thing, and it doesn't matter what industry, what it is. Right?
Speak to that because I'd like, what the American jurisdictions do when they have an opportunity for something like this.
Let me
real quick on this, just because we had this conversation with the federal government last year when I did my roundtable, is they are interested in de-risking and creating trade levers and tax incentive for this. So that there's already buy-in there. Like, I do believe they will move that needle. At the very least, the next step on my Ottawa conversations is asking them to align glass as a strategic material similar to steel and wood. Why not? We are an absolute critical portion of the building envelope. Why are we not a part of that conversation? It's because we haven't shown up yet. Here's our voice. Like, now it's time for us to go put our foot down and say, like, it's time to take us seriously. Otherwise, this isn't a building market we can pretend to support you in.
Sure, everybody's getting hungry now, but I hear all this, and let me give you an example. So remember I mentioned that we did look in the U.S. We look very serious in the U.S. We had a scoped out project in an abandoned, it was I think it made Tabasco glass bottles or something, but the response we got from the state of Louisiana was measured in days and weeks, and it was definitive. and it was constant support, proactive. Try that somewhere in Canada. So what do we do here? You know, what do we do? Because I can tell you, if there's one word I cannot stand in a conversation, is they, when they talk about the politics. They need to do this. We need them to do that. They need to give us a tax break. Yeah. Honestly, folks, it's time. Screw that. We can get this done ourselves. Yep. Government support's great, but if we depend 100% on government support to get anything done in this country, this is just one project. We're going to be in the same situation we're in, because that's how we got here in the first place. So step up, get your damn orders in, support this project, and it'll go, with or without the government, if we do this right. So that's, I probably should close on that, because
So yeah, I just want to add a quick comment to that. I want to thank Glenn for his trust in us and in what Adrian's doing. The amount of work Adrian's put into this, and Fenestration Canada is massive, and we really need to push this over the edge. So please reach out to him, get on the OIs, and let's make it all happen. And let's have lunch. We'll see you back here at 1:00.